But what struck me the most was when I remembered the time when my daughter, around 5 years old, said while riding in the SUV one day,
"Dad, do you know why the car goes thump thump?"
a while back, not long after getting married and having our second child, as our family expanded, we found the need to switch to a larger vehicle. However, due to financial constraints, instead of buying a new one, we ended up purchasing a used SUV. Nowadays, before making a purchase, you can check the accident history online using platforms like Carfax. But back then, such information was non-existent. Instead, especially in rural areas, reliance on personal connections through word of mouth for such purchases was common. I also recently purchased an SUV from the owner of a nearby auto repair shop that I frequently visit. The shop owner mentioned that one of his customers sold his used SUV to buy a new one. Since it was in good condition, he did some repairs and put it on the used car market. However, when I arrived for repairs, the shop owner recommended it to me, stating it was better than my current vehicle and offered me a better deal since it was a direct sale. His recommendation, along with the trust I had in him, convinced me to make the purchase. Additionally, he promised discounted future repairs if I made the purchase through him. It was a very clean SUV with a bit of mileage, but overall in good condition. People around me praised my choice, and some even asked for a connection with the shop owner. Somehow this used car felt special to me, and I felt a sense of pride having made the right decision. However, after purchasing the SUV, I had several minor accidents despite my cautious driving. Unexpected collisions while waiting at traffic lights, accidents while someone was backing up, or dings and scratches after parking became strangely frequent. Initially, I attributed this to adjusting to driving a larger vehicle like an SUV for the first time, but the frequency of these minor collisions felt unusually high. Luckily, the repair shop from which I purchased the SUV offered minor touch-ups and dent repairs at no cost, so I didn't dwell on it much. However, with frequent visits to the repair shop, friends around me started joking that while I had an impeccable record before after switching vehicles, I seemed to have an unusually high number of accidents. Some even joked that maybe the vehicle was possessed. Until then, I used to brush it off without much concern. However, as I continued driving the newly purchased SUV, a nagging suspicion crept in that something was off. It seemed odd because driving has never bored me. Yet whenever I'm behind the wheel, I get drowsy every time, almost causing accidents. But what struck me the most was this distinct thudding noise that accompanied every drive. Despite the car's overall good condition for a used vehicle, this jarring noise reverberated inside the cabin, startling occupants as if a heavy object repeatedly slammed against the exterior of the vehicle. I suspected an engine issue and checked under the hood, only to find nothing wrong. I even checked the wheels thinking they might be related, but they showed no signs of trouble. Sometimes it's hard to ignore as the noise resembled a massive hammer striking the vehicle, prompting my wife to frequently ask if I'd bumped into something. It has been almost a year since I began driving this SUV. I noticed that I started feeling sick more frequently whenever I'm driving. I experienced moments where I felt as though I'd been struck by a bus, accompanied by an odd tingling sensation. Sometimes I even had bizarre dreams. Despite these unsettling experiences, I dismissed them as mere fluctuations in my mood and continued to drive my SUV. One day, still vividly etched in my memory, was a holiday. Everyone was on vacation, and the roads were deserted as I rushed to work. As I made a right turn, I felt an odd sensation through the steering wheel, as if I had hit a nail and punctured a tire, almost like air was slowly leaking out. Due to the holiday, most repair shops, including my usual go-to, were closed, which added to the challenge. In this urgent situation, I headed to a nearby old repair shop. Though I had visited a few times before, it wasn't my regular spot. The owner, an older gentleman, was skilled with repairs, but came off as slightly brusque with an aggressive demeanor that made me hesitant about the place. Despite my reservations and with no other options available, I was grateful to find the shop open and cautiously headed towards the entrance. While the old shop owner was working on another vehicle, he noticed me entering and suddenly waved both hands up in the air, as if signaling me to stop. I paused, wondering if it meant the shop was closed due to the holiday. However, needing my car fixed immediately, I decided to proceed forward. As I moved forward, the older gentleman waved both hands even more vigorously, but I ignored it and went inside. Then the older gentleman stomped towards me, visibly upset. I opened the window and tried to explain, but he suddenly exploded.
This must be the SUV from that incident. Get out of here right now. Get out of my shop.
I was utterly bewildered. I thought of my desperate situation and calmly tried to reason with him. I've been here before and my steering is off. As I was explaining, he cut me off, yelling that I should leave right now. I was taken aback. Was this level of anger necessary? Moreover, if there was something wrong with the tire and steering, it could lead to an accident if I don't fix it now. Just as I was about to protest, the older gentleman again cut me off and urgently gestured for me to leave. I also raised my voice and expressed my anger in response. In that moment, the elderly gentleman took a deep breath and asked if I smoked. I knew exactly what it meant. My anger momentarily subsided and I followed him, wondering what he was going to say. We both lit our cigarettes. After a few puffs of smoke, the older gentleman asked me when I bought the SUV and whether I'm aware of its history before purchasing it. He expressed uneasiness about the vehicle and seemed hesitant to work on it. In response, I said, I recently bought it from the owner of a newly opened repair shop near where I live. The older gentleman let out another puff of cigarette smoke, hesitated for a second, as if debating whether to say something, then continued speaking. The previous owner of this vehicle had visited his shop for repairs several times before he sold it, and the older gentleman claimed to know everything about this vehicle's condition precisely. Recalling the event, the older gentleman described how, on the day the previous owner brought the vehicle to his shop, he performed a quick visual check, finding nothing apparently wrong with it. At first, he thought the customer had come just to refill some fluids. However, as the customer gets off, his pale, terror-stricken face was clearly visible. He then pointed toward the roof of his SUV. The older gentleman, due to the SUV's height, had to climb the ladder to inspect it closely. There, in the middle of the roof, a substantial dent, resembling the impact of a sizable object, came into view. The moment the older gentleman laid eyes on the huge dent, an immediate chill ran down his spine. It triggered unsettling memories tied to another vehicle he had tried to repair, a car driven by someone who tragically took his own life. The sight of the dented roof invoked a sense of PTSD, sending shivers down his entire body. He immediately declined to do a repair, expressing discomfort, and politely asked the customer to find someone else. However, the customer insisted that he should fix it, almost demanding with a commanding voice. Fed up with his nagging demands, the older gentleman said straight to the customer's face that he couldn't be fooled. Someone had fallen on the roof and died. At that moment, the customer's face turned pale. Flustered by the older gentleman's refusal and with full knowledge of what had happened, he insisted it was a deer. However, the older gentleman was already aware that it wasn't a deer, but a real person. The customer, overwhelmed with despair, revealed that other repair shops had also refused the repair. He recounted the day he parked his vehicle near an old mental hospital, where a disturbed individual jumped from a window, fell on top of his SUV, and died instantly. Terrified by the incident, the customer had tried multiple shops before finally arriving at this one, fervently pleading for help. However, the older gentleman refused to work on it due to past torment from haunted experiences with another vehicle involved in a similar tragic event. He suggested the customer try a recently opened shop run by an individual who is relatively young, less superstitious, and unaffected by such incidents. This recommendation led me to this repair shop from which I purchased this vehicle. Not long after that encounter, the older gentleman was surprised when I brought the same vehicle into his shop as if nothing had happened. It dawned on him that the customer, who had fervently begged for its repair, had eventually sold the vehicle to someone else. Upon seeing it again, he found it too unsettling, which was why he told me to leave immediately. Upon learning about what had happened to my SUV, I didn't have the courage to continue driving it, so I ended up scrapping it. Ever since I had driven that car, I encountered nothing but misfortune and unsettling occurrences that evoke only unpleasant feelings. The thought even crossed my mind that if I continued to drive, I might one day die in an accident. I began to suspect that perhaps the previous owner chose not to continue driving that vehicle even after fixing it nicely because he also had experienced something similar to what I went through. But what struck me the most was when I remembered the time when my daughter, around 5 years old, said while riding in the SUV one day,
Dad, do you know why the car goes thump thump? It's because there's a man lying on top of the car.
Back then, I wondered why my daughter would say such a thing. Was it because she was at an age where they come up with a lot of imagination? I simply thought it was just a 5-year-old's imagination, but now that I remembered, it gave me chills. The figure of the man on top of the SUV that my daughter saw, was it just a figment of her imagination or was it a real ghost?